I always thought I had it all figured out. At 27, I had been married for 3 years to my high school sweetheart, Natalie. We met when we were both just teenagers, fumbling through the awkwardness of first love. We shared everything: dreams, fears, and a life we had painstakingly built together. But everything unraveled the day I stumbled upon a secret that would change me forever. It started innocuously enough. My younger brother, Ethan, had moved back into town after finishing his freshman year of college. Ethan was 19, full of youthful exuberance and a knack for getting under my skin in that uniquely annoying way only a younger sibling could manage. Natalie and I welcomed him into our lives. She had always been fond of Ethan, treating him like the little brother she never had. Looking back, there were signs, subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Natalie started dressing up more, even on days she had nowhere to go. Ethan, who usually preferred the company of his friends, seemed to linger around the house more often. They shared jokes I wasn't in on, exchanged glances that felt loaded. But I brushed it off. I trusted Natalie and I loved my brother. Then came the moment that shattered everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had come home early from work. The house was unusually quiet, save for the faint sound of laughter coming from the living room. I walked in, expecting to see Natalie watching one of her shows. Instead, there they were, Natalie and Ethan, sitting way too close on the couch, their heads nearly touching as they whispered. I didn't confront them then. Something in me decided to wait, to gather evidence. Maybe it was denial, or maybe it was the need for undeniable proof. Over the next few weeks, I paid closer attention. I noticed the way Ethan's hand would linger a little too long on Natalie's shoulder, how her laughter came a little too easily when he was around. I started checking her phone when she wasn't looking. And that's when I found it, a string of messages that left no doubt in my mind. Natalie and Ethan were having an affair. My heart sank. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and filled with a rage I had never known. But beneath the fury was a chilling sense of clarity. I wasn't going to confront them immediately. Oh no, they had underestimated me, and I was going to make them regret it in a way they would never forget. Before everything fell apart, my life with Natalie was, by all accounts, the picture of stability. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it was ours. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom home on the outskirts of the city, with a little garden out back that Natalie tended to religiously. She'd spend hours kneeling in the dirt, her hands coated in soil, planting vibrant flowers and vegetables. I used to joke that her green thumb could revive even the most lifeless plant. My days were simple. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction company. The hours were long, but I enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about overseeing a project from start to finish, watching an empty lot transform into a sturdy structure under my guidance. Natalie worked as a graphic designer from home, her creativity shining through in the colorful designs she crafted for small businesses. Our evenings were predictable but comforting. We'd eat dinner together, often something Natalie had cooked with ingredients from her garden. Then we'd settle on the couch for a movie or one of her favorite TV shows. She loved crime dramas, always trying to guess the culprit before the detectives did. We'd laugh, argue over who was right, and then fall asleep holding hands. Ethan's arrival added a new dynamic to our routine. He had always been the free spirit of the family, the golden boy who could charm anyone with his easy smile and quick wit. At 19, he was still figuring out what he wanted to do with his life. College didn't seem to interest him much, but he claimed he was taking a break to find himself. I didn't mind having him around. Sure, he could be a bit of a slob, leaving his dirty dishes in the sink and his laundry scattered everywhere. But he was my brother. I figured he needed a little guidance, a stable environment to help him get back on track. Natalie seemed to enjoy having him there too. She said it made the house feel livelier. Looking back, maybe I was too trusting, too blind to the cracks forming in the life I thought was solid. But at the time, I was content. I believed in us, in Natalie and me, in the bond we had built over nearly a decade together. I thought we were unshakable. Then there were the small things that started to shift. Natalie began spending more time on her appearance. It wasn't a drastic change, just little things, like wearing makeup more often or buying new clothes. When I commented on it, she brushed it off, saying she wanted to feel good about herself. I didn't think much of it. After all, everyone deserves to feel confident. Ethan, meanwhile, had a way of inserting himself into our lives in subtle but significant ways. He'd suggest movie nights where he picked the films, usually action-packed thrillers that Natalie seemed to enjoy more than I did. He'd offer to help her in the garden, something I rarely did because I lacked the patience for it. They'd come in laughing, covered in dirt, and she'd beam at me like nothing was out of the ordinary. I told myself I was overthinking things, that it was good they got along. One evening, I came home to find Natalie and Ethan cooking dinner together. It was an odd sight. Natalie rarely let anyone into her kitchen while she was cooking. She called it her sanctuary. But there they were, laughing as they chopped vegetables and stirred sauces. When I walked in, they barely acknowledged me. Ethan joked about how he was a better sous chef than I'd ever been, and Natalie laughed in agreement. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a twinge of something I couldn't quite name. Jealousy? Suspicion? No, it couldn't be. I trusted them both implicitly. Natalie was my wife, the woman who had stood by me through thick and thin. Ethan was my brother, my flesh and blood. They wouldn't betray me, would they? I tried to push the doubts away, focusing instead on the life we had built. The quiet mornings sipping coffee on the patio, the lazy Sundays spent binge-watching shows, the shared dreams of one day starting a family. It was a good life. A normal life. But normalcy has a way of lulling you into a false sense of security. It makes you ignore the signs, dismiss the gut feelings that tell you something is wrong. I didn't know it then, but the life I thought was so stable was already crumbling beneath my feet. The day I discovered the truth was one of those deceptively ordinary days that life often reserves for its cruelest twists. I woke up early, kissed Natalie goodbye as she stayed in bed scrolling through her phone, and headed to work. The project was in its final stages, and I was swamped with deadlines. Little did I know that by the time I returned home, my world would be turned upside down. It began with a minor inconvenience, an issue with the house's Wi-Fi. Natalie had been complaining about it for weeks, and since I'm the tech-savvy one, it fell on me to fix it. After dinner, I decided to investigate. Natalie was in the shower, and Ethan was out with friends, so I figured it was the perfect time to troubleshoot without interruptions. I logged into the router's admin settings to check for any problems, but something caught my eye, a connected device labeled Ethan's phone. It wasn't unusual for him to use the Wi-Fi, but I noticed it was transferring data. Curious, I clicked through a few more settings and realized it wasn't just browsing, it was syncing to the cloud. For a moment, I hesitated. Ethan was my brother. Snooping felt wrong. But the nagging feeling I'd been suppressing for weeks reared its ugly head. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and before I knew it, I had accessed the file logs. The first file I opened was a photo. It was Natalie and Ethan. They were in the living room, sitting on the same couch I'd spent countless evenings on with my wife. But this wasn't a casual family snapshot. They were far too close, his arm draped over her shoulders, their faces illuminated by the glow of the TV. And Natalie's expression, it wasn't just laughter or joy, it was something deeper. My stomach churned, but I kept scrolling. The photos became more incriminating. Ethan and Natalie in the garden, their hands brushing against each other as they worked. Ethan and Natalie at a local cafe, sitting across from each other with a familiarity that was painfully intimate. The timestamps told me this wasn't a one-time mistake. It had been going on for weeks, if not months. Then I stumbled upon the messages. The first was innocent enough. Ethan, I love seeing you happy. Natalie, you make me feel alive again. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. Natalie, we have to be careful. He can't find out. Ethan, don't worry. He's so busy with work, he barely notices us. I felt a wave of nausea. My hands trembled as I read message after message, each one a dagger to the heart. They spoke about stolen moments, the thrill of sneaking around, and, most damning of all, their plans to continue. I heard the shower turn off. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly logged out of the system and closed the laptop. Natalie emerged from the bathroom in her robe, her hair damp, looking as serene as ever. Hey, she said, smiling at me. What's wrong? You look pale. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one I'd just uncovered. But I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed time to process this, to figure out my next move. So I forced a smile and said, just a long day at work. She leaned down to kiss me, and I fought the urge to pull away. Her lips felt like poison. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Natalie slept soundly beside me. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just about the affair, it was the fact that the two people I trusted most in the world had conspired behind my back. The next day, I called in sick to work and began gathering more evidence. I went through her phone, her emails, even her social media accounts. Each discovery felt like another punch to the gut. The lies, the manipulation, it was all there, laid out in painful detail. But amid the anger and heartbreak, a plan began to form. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. If they wanted to treat me like a fool, I'd give them a show they'd never forget. I started small, dropping subtle hints to let them know I was onto them. I'd make comments about trust and loyalty, watching their reactions closely. Natalie would laugh nervously, while Ethan would avoid eye contact altogether. It was almost amusing how transparent they were. Then I escalated. I began leaving my phone open on the kitchen counter, with fake messages from a lawyer about a confidential matter. I'd disappear for hours without explanation, letting their paranoia fester. I wanted them to feel the weight of their deceit, to wonder if I knew, to question every move they made. But the piece de resistance was still to come. I had gathered all the evidence I needed, and now it was time for the next phase of my plan. Revenge, but not the kind they would expect. Oh no, I wasn't going to throw a tantrum or confront them in a fit of rage. That would have been too easy, too obvious. Instead, I was going to make them regret their betrayal in a way they would never see coming by turning the tables and using their own tactics against them, all while maintaining an air of calm and control. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was playing a game, except this time, I was the one who knew all the rules. And trust me, nothing would be more satisfying than watching them squirm as the realization hit them that their little secret was no longer safe. The first step was to get Natalie and Ethan to start doubting their own actions. I couldn't let them know that I was onto them. Not just yet. I needed them to think that they were still in control, that everything was fine, so I could work my way into the perfect position to strike. I began to act normal again, too normal. I played the role of the oblivious husband, the one who was too busy with work to notice the subtle shifts in their behavior. I'd catch Ethan and Natalie in the living room, laughing and joking together, and I'd smile warmly, as if nothing was wrong. They were beginning to get more comfortable with each other, more casual with their exchanges. And I could see the unease in their eyes every time I walked into a room. But it wasn't enough. They needed to believe that I was still clueless, that I hadn't cracked the code. So I devised a little experiment, a series of innocent-seeming but calculated moves that would force them to reveal their true feelings without them realizing they were being baited. The first move was simple. I bought a new phone. I hadn't planned on upgrading, but it seemed like a perfect excuse to make them nervous. I left the old phone on the kitchen counter one morning, and when I was sure Natalie and Ethan were together, I casually mentioned that I was setting up the new one. I saw the instant flicker of discomfort in their eyes as I made sure to leave the old phone in plain view, fully unlocked. I made sure to keep the conversation light, mentioning how easy it was to transfer contacts and apps, not giving them a chance to act surprised or suspicious. But I could tell that the two of them were already starting to sweat. Then came the second move. Subtle comments. Every day, I started dropping little hints that suggested I was aware of the tension between them. It was always in the form of half-jokes, nothing too direct, just comments like, "You guys sure seem to have a lot of fun together lately," or, "You two make quite the team." Each time, they'd laugh nervously, the weight of the words hanging between us like an unspoken secret. But it wasn't just for her. Ethan needed to see this too. I wanted him to witness the contrast between the man he thought he knew and the version of me that was re-emerging, the man who still cared about his wife, the man who had no idea that his world was about to be shattered. And so, I set the stage for the final move. One evening, when I knew Ethan was out with his friends and Natalie and I were alone, I arranged a dinner at home. I cooked her favorite meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh vegetables from the garden. I wanted it to be a perfect evening, the kind we used to have before everything changed. I wanted to remind her of the life we'd built, the love we'd shared. As we sat down to eat, I casually asked her about her day. I wanted to gauge her reaction. Was she still the woman I thought I knew? Or had she already become someone else? "I saw Ethan today," I said, my voice casual but laced with meaning. "He seemed pretty happy. He's been spending a lot of time with you lately, huh?" Natalie froze. For the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. She smiled nervously, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Yeah, we've been hanging out a lot. You know, he's family. I nodded as if I understood, but I wasn't buying it. After dinner, we settled into the living room. I put on a movie, but I wasn't really watching it. I could feel the tension in the air, like an electric current that buzzed just below the surface. Natalie was trying to act normal, but I could tell she was on edge. She kept glancing at me, her hand resting on her lap, as though waiting for the moment when I'd reveal that I knew everything. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I smiled at her. You know, I said, I've been thinking about our future, about everything we've built together. I want to make sure we're always in sync. Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. Of course, we're fine, right? We've always been fine. I chuckled, leaning back on the couch. Yeah, we are. Just wanted to make sure we're both on the same page. The evening ended quietly, but I could see it in her eyes: doubt, fear. She knew I was playing a game, and she had no idea how far I was willing to go. As the days passed, I kept up the charade. I wanted them both to think they had outsmarted me, that they were still in control. But deep down, I knew the truth: they had underestimated me. And when the time came, they would see just how wrong they were. The tension in the house was unbearable, like a taut wire ready to snap. Natalie and Ethan had no idea that I was already preparing the final act of my plan. The more I observed them, the more I realized just how careless they had become. The little stolen glances, the nervous laughter when I entered the room, it was all adding up. They were on edge, and I was savoring every second of it. For weeks, I had been setting the stage. I watched them closely, noting their every move, every word. They thought they had outsmarted me, that I was just a clueless husband, too caught up in work to notice what was happening under my nose. But I knew better. I had seen enough, and now it was time to put my plan into motion. I was going to make them pay, not through confrontation, but through a grand spectacle, something so absurdly over the top that they would never see it coming. They thought I was weak. They thought I didn't notice the way they exchanged glances, the way their laughter rang just a little too loud when I was out of the room. But I was about to show them how wrong they were. The first step in my plan was deceptively simple. I had to create an innocent opportunity for them to be together, away from the house. I had to make sure they would let their guard down, and I knew just how to do it. I suggested a dinner out at a new restaurant in town. Nothing fancy, just a casual family-style outing, something they wouldn't think twice about. A perfect cover. But what they didn't know was that I had already set everything in motion. I had contacted a few friends to help me orchestrate the night's events, all carefully timed to catch them completely off guard. This wasn't going to be just any dinner. No, it would be the night they would never forget. When the night arrived, everything seemed perfectly normal. We piled into the car, and I pretended to be as enthusiastic as I had been in the past. Ethan, as usual, was the life of the party, cracking jokes and keeping the mood light. Natalie seemed a little quieter, a little more tense, but I chalked it up to her nerves. Maybe she was just tired. After all, the past few weeks had been stressful for both of us. Or so she thought. We arrived at the restaurant, and it was exactly as I had anticipated, bustling with people, dim lights casting a warm glow over the tables, and the scent of delicious food wafting through the air. The ambience was perfect for my plan to unfold. As we were led to our table, I caught a glimpse of the first of my accomplices, a friend of mine, a server at the restaurant, ready to help execute the plan. He gave me a subtle nod, and I returned it, pretending not to notice. The plan was simple. I had arranged for a few surprises, all designed to make Natalie and Ethan squirm. The first surprise came when our waiter handed us the menus. But these were no ordinary menus. Inside each one, nestled among the restaurant's offerings, was a small card. I had slipped it in there earlier, ensuring that it would be the first thing they saw. The card was simple but damning. In bold, bright letters, it read, "I know what you've been doing." It was the perfect opening. A clear message, one that would send shockwaves through the two of them. I watched as Natalie's face drained of color. Her eyes flicked nervously between me and Ethan, as if she couldn't decide who to look at first. Ethan, on the other hand, looked genuinely confused for a moment. He had no idea what was happening. But Natalie, she knew. I could see it in the way her hand trembled as she clutched the menu. Well, I said, breaking the silence with a casual smile. That was an interesting little note. I wonder who it's from. Ethan chuckled nervously, his eyes darting around the table. I could tell it wasn't genuine. He was caught off guard, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Natalie, trying to play it off, smiled weakly. It's probably just a prank, right? Someone messing with us. I raised an eyebrow. Maybe, but it sure feels like someone knows something. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken tension. I could see the cracks forming in her carefully constructed facade. She was starting to break, and it was delicious. But that was just the beginning. I needed to make them sweat, to truly feel the weight of their actions. The next surprise came when the server, my accomplice, returned to our table. He asked if we needed anything else, and I could tell Natalie was beginning to panic. Her eyes kept darting toward the door, as if she was considering making a run for it. But she didn't. She couldn't. She knew that leaving would only make things worse. A few moments later, the server returned with the second surprise, a cake. But this wasn't just any cake. It was decorated in bold, garish letters. Caught you. He placed it on the table in front of us, beaming with a smile that only made the tension more palpable. The surrounding tables laughed and chatted, but to me, it felt like the walls were closing in. Natalie's face had gone the same shade of pale as when I first discovered her betrayal. Her lips were pressed tightly together, her eyes wide with panic. Ethan, meanwhile, was looking anywhere but at me. He didn't know what to say, what to do. He was lost, and I was enjoying every second of it. Happy to celebrate? I said with a smirk, leaning back in my chair, savoring the moment. Natalie's voice came out shaky as she whispered, "Why would someone send this?" I turned to her slowly, my smile widening. Maybe because someone knows what's been going on. Her face faltered, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She was breaking, and I wasn't done yet. There was more to come, and I wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. You thought you could hide it, didn't you? You thought I wouldn't find out. But I knew, Natalie. I knew all along. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was paralyzed with fear, and I could see the guilt washing over her. Ethan was still processing, but I could see the gears turning in his head. He was starting to figure it out, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it. And then came the final blow. The waiter, my accomplice, returned one last time. This time, he placed an envelope on the table in front of me. I took it slowly, enjoying the look of horror on Natalie's face as she realized what was about to happen. The envelope was addressed to her, and inside, there was a printed message that would haunt her for the rest of her life. I hope this serves as a reminder of how far you've gone. I always knew, and I will always remember. The look in Natalie's eyes at that moment was pure panic. She looked as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. The air seemed to thicken with her regret, and I could see her struggling to keep her composure. She looked at me as though I had betrayed her, as though I was the one who had crossed a line. But I hadn't. The only line that had been crossed was the one she had drawn with my trust. Ethan finally spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "What's going on? What did you do?" I looked at him, my smile widening. "Oh, Ethan, you should have known this was coming. It's just a little payback. A taste of your own medicine." At that moment, everything clicked into place for me. The tables had turned. Natalie and Ethan had no idea how to react, no idea how to salvage their little secret. They were trapped, and there was no way out. As I sat there, watching the realization sink in, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. They had thought they could play me for a fool, but I was the one who had won. The plan had worked, and the revenge was sweet. But in the end, it wasn't about revenge at all. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of self, and making sure they would never forget the cost of betrayal. The restaurant was quiet again after the last exchange. The tension, however, was palpable. I could feel it hanging in the air, thick and suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in around us. Natalie was pale, and Ethan was frozen in disbelief. They both sat there in silence, their once casual dinner now transformed into an uncomfortable standoff. It was strange, almost surreal. Just hours ago, this was supposed to be an ordinary evening out, a normal dinner with family. But now, it felt like the calm before a storm, one that would irrevocably change everything. I sat there, watching them squirm. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't filled with the anger I had expected to feel. Instead, it was a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes when you've played your hand perfectly and watched the results unfold just as you planned. In a way, it was almost like watching a well-executed play, a performance where the actors didn't know their lines and the audience could see it all. I broke the silence first, but not with words of anger or accusation. No, I had already done that. Now, it was time for them to process what had happened, to feel the weight of their actions. So, I began, my voice calm, almost jovial. How does it feel, being caught? Knowing that someone has been watching your every move? Natalie's face crumpled. She opened her mouth as though to speak, but no words came out. She couldn't speak because she knew there was no excuse, no defense. She had been caught red-handed, and there was nothing left to say. Ethan was still in shock. I could see his mind racing as he tried to piece together what had just happened. He looked at me, then back at Natalie, his brow furrowed. Why? Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, his voice small, like a child who'd just realized they'd made a terrible mistake. I could see it in his eyes, the guilt, the shame, the realization that he'd lost something precious. He had betrayed me, and in doing so, had betrayed himself. But there was something almost pathetic about him now, sitting there, unsure of what to do, unable to confront the magnitude of his actions. He wasn't the confident, cocky kid he used to be. No. Now he was a boy who had just woken up to the nightmare of his own making. You don't get it, do you, Ethan? I said quietly, leaning forward. You thought it was just a fling, didn't you? Just a little secret, something that would stay hidden in the shadows. But you're wrong. You hurt me, and you hurt her, too. I gestured toward Natalie, who was sitting still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't look up at me, didn't respond to my words. She had retreated inward, unable to face the consequences of her betrayal. But I wasn't done with her yet. Do you even care? I asked, turning my attention fully to Natalie. Do you care about what you've done? Or is this just a game to you? The silence between us was heavy. She couldn't answer, and I wasn't expecting her to. She had no excuses, no explanation that could make any of this okay. She had taken something that was mine, my trust, my love, and used it to betray me in the most humiliating way possible. And the worst part was, she hadn't even felt guilty enough to stop herself before it was too late. I looked at both of them, my mind clearer than ever before. They thought they had the power, that they could control the situation. But in the end, I was the one in control. I was the one who held the cards, the one who had planned this all out, and they would have to live with the consequences. I hope you realize what you've done, I said, standing up. I hope this serves as a lesson, because this will stay with you. It will never go away. The finality of my words lingered in the air as I turned to leave. There was no need for further confrontation, no need to scream or yell. The truth was out, and that was enough. As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because I had destroyed their relationship, but because I had reclaimed my own sense of self-worth. I hadn't let their betrayal define me. Instead, I had taken control of the narrative, flipped the script, and forced them to confront their own actions. In the days that followed, things fell apart rapidly. The silence in the house was deafening. I had been cold, calculating, and patient. Now, I could see the cracks in the foundation of their relationship. Natalie's attempts to reach out to me were met with cold indifference. She would call, send texts, but I didn't respond. What was the point? What could she possibly say that would change anything? Ethan, on the other hand, seemed desperate. He came by the house more frequently, knocking on the door, calling my phone. But I ignored him. The boy who once seemed so full of life and confidence was now a shell of himself, hollowed out by the guilt of his actions. As for Natalie, she tried to act like everything was normal. She cooked dinner, made small talk, and even tried to smile at me as if nothing had happened. But I could see it in her eyes, the fear, the shame. She knew what she had done, and no amount of pretending would ever change that. And then, one evening, a week after the dinner, Natalie left. She packed her things and walked out of the house without a word. No explanation, no final plea for forgiveness. She just left. I didn't feel relief, nor did I feel anger. I felt nothing. I had already moved on in my mind. The relationship was over before it had ever really ended. She had broken it long before I discovered the truth, and I was simply giving the final blow. In the aftermath, I took time to reflect on everything that had happened. At first, I had been consumed by anger and hurt, but now I realized that this experience had taught me something valuable. I had learned the importance of self-respect, of not letting someone's betrayal define who I was. I had learned to take control of my life, to reclaim my own dignity, and to never again allow anyone to trample on my trust. Ethan and Natalie would have to live with their choices. They would have to answer for what they had done, and they would have to carry the weight of their guilt for the rest of their lives. But as for me, I was moving forward. I was stronger, wiser, and more prepared for whatever the future had in store. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about building myself back up from the wreckage they had left behind. And I had done just that. The house was quiet now. For the first time in months, it felt like I could breathe again. The weight that had hung over me for so long, the suffocating tension caused by the lies, the deceit, it was gone. Natalie was gone. Ethan was gone. And with them, the chaos that had consumed me. The silence was a welcome relief, a sign that the storm had finally passed. But as much as I told myself that the healing had already begun, the truth was, it wasn't as simple as that. I had spent so much time focused on getting revenge, on executing my carefully planned retribution, that I hadn't allowed myself to process what had truly happened. I hadn't let myself grieve. For the first few days after Natalie left, I went through the motions, waking up, eating, working. It was as if I was just trying to distract myself from the truth. But deep down, I knew that I was lying to myself. The emptiness in the house wasn't just about the absence of Natalie or Ethan. It was the emptiness that came from realizing that everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted, had been shattered in the blink of an eye. I decided I needed to take time for myself, to get away from everything and process what had happened. I went for long walks in the park, letting the cool air clear my head. There were days when I simply sat on a bench, watching the world go by, and allowed myself to feel the sadness I had been trying to suppress. It was hard. It felt like a betrayal to myself, to feel so weak, to acknowledge the hurt. But I knew I had to. The more I walked, the more I realized that I had been so focused on punishing them, on seeking justice for their wrongs, that I had neglected my own healing. Revenge had been sweet, but it had only been the first step in the process. I needed to heal, to forgive, not for them, but for myself. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought about what had happened, a wave of anger would rise up in me. I would remember how I had felt, discovering the betrayal, the shock, the disbelief. The anger would claw at me, reminding me of the humiliation, the lies, and the months of deceit. But each time, I took a deep breath and let the anger pass. I didn't need to carry it with me anymore. I had already done what I set out to do, and now it was time to focus on something else myself. As the days went on, I began to reconnect with parts of myself I had lost during the relationship. I had always loved reading, but in the chaos of the past few years, I had stopped. I dusted off some old books I had collected and started reading again. At first, it felt strange, as if I was reconnecting with a part of me that had been dormant for far too long. But slowly, I began to remember who I was before the lies, before the betrayal. I also reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in ages. It felt like I had distanced myself from everyone during the relationship, as if I had been too wrapped up in trying to make things work, too focused on the facade of happiness. But now, I was ready to face the people I had neglected, to rebuild the relationships that had been strained or forgotten. One evening, a friend of mine called. He had been there for me during the toughest moments, but I hadn't fully opened up to him yet. He could tell something had changed, and he asked how I was doing. "I'm okay," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of my answer. "Actually, I'm better than I thought I'd be." We talked for a while, about everything and nothing. He listened, and in the silence, I realized something important. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I wasn't just the guy who had been cheated on, who had lost everything. I was still me, someone who had learned, grown, and emerged from the ashes of betrayal. That conversation marked a turning point. I realized that my healing wasn't just about moving on from the pain. It was about rediscovering who I was without the shadow of the past hanging over me. As the weeks went by, I started to feel lighter, more at peace. I found solace in simple things, waking up early to watch the sunrise, cooking meals for myself, enjoying the quiet moments that had once felt so lonely but now felt like small treasures. I had finally reclaimed my life, and I realized that while revenge had been satisfying, it wasn't the end. The end was about finding peace with myself, about accepting what had happened and letting go of the past. And then, one afternoon, I received a message from Natalie. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I opened it anyway. "I'm sorry," she wrote, "for everything. I wish things had been different. I will always care about you, but I understand if you never want to speak to me again." I stared at the message for a long time. There was no anger in me now, no desire for further confrontation. I simply felt nothing. It wasn't apathy. Not really. It was just that I had come to terms with it all. I had done what I needed to do, and now it was time for both of us to move on. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I put my phone down and took a walk. As I walked, I thought about everything I had been through, the pain, the betrayal, the revenge, and how far I had come. I had learned that healing was not a linear process, and that closure didn't always come from the other person. Sometimes it came from within. The next day, I sent a simple reply. "I hope you find what you're looking for." It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was the closure I needed, and I knew it was the closure she needed, too. I had no desire to reopen the door to that chapter of my life. I had let go, and that was enough. I continued my life, moving forward with a newfound sense of purpose. I focused on my career, my hobbies, and the friendships that had withstood the storm. I started dating again, but this time it was different. I wasn't looking for someone to fill the void left by Natalie. I was looking for someone who could complement my life, someone who would appreciate me for who I was, not for what they could take. As the months passed, the memory of Natalie and Ethan faded into the background. I didn't think about them every day, and the sting of betrayal dulled with time. I had made peace with my past, and in doing so, I had found a new sense of freedom. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was content with that. Time had passed, and with each passing day, I felt a little lighter, a little more at peace. The weight of the past, of the betrayal, the hurt, the heartbreak, had gradually faded, though not entirely. But that was okay. I no longer felt the need to chase after perfect closure, because I had already realized that closure wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't a letter, a conversation, or a definitive moment of reconciliation. Closure was an ongoing process, a slow untangling of the threads that had once bound me to the pain. And I was beginning to understand that I didn't need the people who had hurt me to find peace. I had the power to do that on my own. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. No longer was I at the mercy of others' actions or decisions. No longer did I define myself by the mistakes and betrayals of the past. I had taken responsibility for my own healing, and that felt empowering. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into roles I thought I was supposed to play. As a husband, I had tried to be everything to Natalie, supportive, loving, patient, forgiving. But I had lost myself in the process. I had bent over backward to maintain a perfect relationship, never considering that maybe the most important thing was to remain true to myself. When I discovered the betrayal, it shattered everything I thought I knew about love and trust. But in the aftermath, I found something more important, my own identity. I wasn't just the man who had been cheated on. I wasn't just the one who had been wronged. I was a person who had endured and learned, who had grown through the hardship. I had realized that my worth wasn't tied to how others treated me or what they took from me. It was inherent in who I was. It was a strange but liberating thought. I didn't need Natalie's love or approval to feel complete. And I didn't need to seek revenge on Ethan anymore, either. The satisfaction I had felt when I confronted them, when I had exposed the truth, was enough. The act of standing up for myself, of demanding the truth and not backing down, had been the revenge. It had been enough to prove to myself that I was stronger than the hurt they had caused. There were moments when I still found myself reflecting on the past. I'd see couples together, and a pang of sadness would echo through me, reminding me of the dreams and plans that had once seemed so certain. But those moments were fewer now, and they didn't consume me like they once had. I had replaced those thoughts with new memories, new experiences, and new goals. I had reconnected with old friends, ones I had pushed away when things with Natalie had gotten intense. I'd forgotten what it felt like to laugh without a weight on my chest, to be surrounded by people who accepted me without judgment. I realized how much I had sacrificed for a relationship that, in hindsight, was built on shaky foundations. The first time I went on a date after everything, I felt nervous. Not in the way you'd feel before meeting someone new, but in a way that was deeper, almost like I had forgotten how to open up. The nerves weren't because I didn't believe in love anymore. They were because I had forgotten what it meant to trust someone again, to let someone in. But as I sat across from her, a kind and genuine woman with an easy smile, I realized that I could still trust. I could still hope. I could still love. This time, though, I knew it would be different. I wasn't going to lose myself in another person. I wasn't going to ignore red flags or sacrifice my happiness for the sake of someone else. I had learned the importance of self-respect, of maintaining boundaries, and of giving love freely without expecting it to complete me. I was already whole. Natalie had reached out a couple of times, always with vague attempts at rekindling some form of friendship, some kind of closure on her terms. I ignored the messages. There was nothing left for us to talk about, and I didn't owe her any explanations or further conversation. The woman I once thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I had no anger toward her, no bitterness. I simply didn't want her back in my life. Ethan, too, had tried to reach me. He had shown up at my door a couple of times, wanting to explain, to apologize, but I never answered. I had nothing to say to him anymore. What could he possibly say that would change what had happened? The apology came too late. And in a way, I had already forgiven him. He was a victim of his own immaturity and poor decisions, but he wasn't my responsibility anymore. I was finally able to forgive myself too. It hadn't been easy, but over time, I realized that I had blamed myself for the collapse of my marriage. I had convinced myself that if I had been better, if I had been more attentive, more understanding, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But the truth was, I hadn't caused the betrayal. The responsibility lay with Natalie and Ethan. I had been a good partner. I had loved her wholeheartedly. And in the end, that was all I could control. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I stopped near the same bench where I had sat during the days after everything fell apart. It had been months, but I felt a sense of calm in the air around me, as though the universe was finally at peace with me. It wasn't perfect. Life never was. But I had come to accept that. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty and to trust that the path I was on was leading me to something better. I stopped to watch the sunset, letting the warm glow of the evening wash over me. I thought about everything I had gone through, the heartache, the anger, the revenge, and I realized that the most important thing was that I had come out of it stronger. I had learned to live for myself, to not let my past define me, and to move forward with open eyes and an open heart. The hardest part was over. Now, it was time to live, to experience life on my terms. I was free, truly free, from the shackles of betrayal and pain. And in that freedom, I found the ability to love again, first and foremost, myself. And as I walked away from the bench, toward a future unknown, but full of possibility, I realized that revenge hadn't been the endgame after all. The real victory was in the healing, in the growth, in the peace I had found within myself. It wasn't about proving anything to Natalie, to Ethan, or to anyone else. It was about proving to myself that I was worthy of happiness, of love, and of a fresh start. And I was ready for that fresh start.